What's the best food to eat in Paris? And what are some that locals would avoid? I'm French, I live in Paris, and today I'm gonna be ranking pretty much every food you can find in Paris. Starting with the one you should have as soon as you step foot in the city, which is the baguette. This is the most iconic French bread there is, and if you're not biting into one within 15 minutes of arriving to Paris, you're doing something wrong. So here visitors often make two mistakes. The first one is not going to a bakery. There's good bakeries pretty much everywhere in Paris, and 93% of us are less than a 5-minute walk away from a bakery. So there's not really a reason to go somewhere else like a supermarket. Then the other one is just getting a baguette and not getting a baguette tradition. It should look like this, not like this. And you can pretty much have a baguette all day long, but if you go in the morning, you'll increase your chances to get hot bread, which is the best thing in the whole world. So in terms of ranking, let's take a look at my tier list. I'll explain things as we go, but a baguette definitely belongs in the A tier, which I've called I'd eat this every single day. But another iconic breakfast food visitors are doing wrong is croissants. Croissants are this flaky dough pastry that you can find pretty much everywhere. And here, there's absolutely no need to go to a hype bakery and wait for hours in line. If you do that, you'll only find tourists there. Instead, what you want to do is go to your neighborhood bakery that's within a 5-minute walk from where you're staying. And if you need recommendations, there's so many of them on my Paris food map with over 300 places I've tried and loved. Okay, so here it is important that I tell you how to recognize a good croissant, because actually between 60 to 80% of croissants sold are frozen. So a good croissant should look a bit like this. It has many layers. It is perfectly golden on top, very lightly crunchy. But then when you open it, you can see those little pockets of air that make the texture perfect. Also, if you smell a good croissant, it should smell like butter. If you've never done that before, you should start your day with a croissant. It's one of these things you need to experience in your lifetime, especially if you've never had a proper artisanal croissant before. But then my recommendation is to move on to bigger and better things. And I'm gonna tell you which pastries locals actually prefer to croissants in the next section. But that's why I'm gonna rate croissants a C tier. I'd advise you to have it at least once during your trip, but there's better things in life. So croissants are part of a French food group called viennoiserie. There's not really an English equivalent, which is between breads and cakes. You'll find them in their own section at the bakery, and they are often eaten as breakfast or as a snack. And I personally call them pastries in my videos, but it's not a perfect translation. So viennoiserie are often made with the same flaky dough as croissants, but croissants are actually my least favorite viennoiserie in comparison. And here are a few that I think are better. So first we have chocolatine or pain au chocolat or chocolate croissant. You know, when you add chocolate to anything, it's always better. And this is my favorite everyday pastry, so I'm gonna put it in the A tier. Then we have croissant aux amandes, which is my favorite special occasion pastry. So it's just a croissant in which a thick almond paste has been put in. And it is absolutely delicious and decadent. And that's why we're gonna inaugurate the S tier, which I've called délicieux, which means delicious. Then we're gonna group all the other ones together, and other viennoiseries can include chouquettes, which are tiny puff pastries with sugar on top, pain au raisin, which is a raisin swirl pastry, chausson aux pommes, which is filled with applesauce, pain suisse, which has vanilla pastry cream and chocolate chips, and of course brioche, which is a sweet egg and butter bread. And at this point, there's so many of them that you can't really go wrong by just going to a bakery and pointing at stuff you want, because they're all delicious. So I'm ranking them in my B tier, which is on rotation. I'll have some of them from time to time. And then there's just one you should be careful of if you want to have a productive day after. And if you're from Brittany, I know I will make you unhappy, but it's this one called kouign-amann. So this is a pastry that's from Brittany. That's basically 1/3 butter, 1/3 sugar, and 1/3 flour. It is delicious, but you will need a nap after. So this is why I'm ranking it in my E tier, which I've called just to say you've tried it. So these were my favorite French breakfast foods. And a lot of Parisians would keep the best foods for dinner, but before we get to that, we still have lunch to cover. And here, if you're visiting, you might be tempted to maybe try one of the most famous French foods you've heard about before your trip. And that would be a big mistake. Let me explain. So for example, these would be snails, or escargots in French. They're snails served in a parsley and garlic sauce. The sauce is very good. Or you could maybe have some French onion soup, which I'm personally not a fan of, because I don't really like onion too much, which if you're into onions, it's definitely the thing for you, because it's a very creamy, cheesy, and rich soup. And then there's also frog legs that a lot of people want to try when they come to Paris. And here I have to be honest with you, I don't even remember the last time I ate that. I think you're supposed to fry them in butter, parsley, and garlic. And well, you can absolutely try these foods if you want. You're in a free country. You have to know that these are mostly popular with tourists. Actually, very few locals eat them regularly. Personally, the only few times I've eaten these foods is when I have foreign friends visiting and they specifically ask me to try them. You can often find them on the menu at brasserie. So if you see them on the menu, it doesn't mean you should run away. But you're here to discover the culture, so you might want to try something locals love to eat instead. So my ranking for all these foods is an E tier. Maybe have them once, just say you've tried them, and then move on. So if you want to have a nice local lunch, this is what I'd recommend. So first, you absolutely need to go to a crêperie, which is a type of restaurant where they make crêpes. Crêpes are thin pancake in which you can put pretty much everything, and there's two types. There's galette, which is the salty version with buckwheat, and here my two favorites are just the classic one with ham, cheese, and an egg. And there's also galette saucisse, which is a galette rolled around a sausage. Then what we would call crêpe is mostly the sweet crêpes, which are made with wheat, and my fave here would be beurre sucre, which is salty butter and sugar. This is definitely an A. I would have crêpes and galettes every single day if I could. Then one of the most iconic French lunch food, steak-frites, which is just that. It's a steak with fries, and it's very iconic. There's many different versions here. One you've probably seen before is this restaurant, which is a famous Parisian restaurant where they serve it with a green pepper sauce. But you can find it at pretty much every neighborhood restaurant. I'd recommend picking one that's famous for its meats, and you can also find a lot of them on my Paris food map. Then if you're feeling a bit adventurous, we have steak tartare, which as you can see here is raw meat, conserved with seasonings and a raw egg. That might seem scary, but it's definitely worth trying. Then we're getting into what's maybe the most iconic Parisian cafe food, which is croque-monsieur. Croque-monsieur is a hot ham and cheese sandwich, and you can sometimes find it with an egg on top. In that case, it would be croque-madame. I have to admit that they're not my favorite because they can often get expensive for no reason at all. So I'm gonna be putting them in my E tier. If you're curious about them, just go ahead and have them, but it will not change your life for sure. Also, you have to remember that French service is pretty slow. So if you sit down at any restaurant for lunch, it will take around an hour. So if you're in a rush, you might want to check any bakery on my Paris food map and get the two following foods. First one is the jambon-beurre sandwich, which is a baguette bread cut in half, some butter, and some Parisian ham. And here again, I'm begging you to please not go to a hype place. I've seen some people spend upwards of $30 for a sandwich, like this woman here. And I'm happy she tried the $30 sandwich because we don't ever have to do it. You have to know that most sandwiches in Paris are around €5. And that's already a lot for a sandwich. And I also have to say that jambon-beurre is not my fave sandwich. As someone who grew up in the south of France, I think the Paris ham is fine, but cured ham called jambon de pays is the absolute best, and I like my sandwiches to have a little bit of cheese too. And if you're into that as well, that's called jambon-fromage. Then we have quiche lorraine, which is a savory French tart that's filled with cream, eggs, and delicious little pieces of bacon called lardons, and it comes from this region called Lorraine, and it is absolutely delicious. You should absolutely have it. It's maybe one of my favorite fast French meals. And if you're coming to Paris, you should make sure you leave plenty of time to enjoy your meals the French way and not rush through them. So for example, if you're sitting down at lunch for a meal, it will take you around an hour and you could literally stay all night long at dinner for a restaurant. So make sure you plan accordingly and don't overpack your schedule. Also, I recommend you come prepared and you book all your tickets for museums and activities in advance to avoid spending hours in line. And I book all my activities on Klook. Klook is a long-term partner of the channel, and I've been using them for a while to book activities and hotel both in Paris and around the world. They have all the classic Paris activities you can think of, like the Louvre, and they also have really cool, unique activities like a champagne wine tour in France. Their app is super easy to use, and they often have great deals on activities, so if you want to try them, click the link in the description below and use my code LucileYTKlook. Okay, now let's move on to goûter, which is the 4 p.m. French afternoon snack. It's usually something you do as a kid. As an adult, I love goûter, and I think you should also have goûter because that's when I usually love to have something sweet. So let's quickly get into sweets and cakes. First, we have macaron, which is a little cookie made of meringue with a little soft filling inside, and these can be good if they're homemade, but a lot of the ones you can find in the shops are often industrial. So this is why I'm ranking it a D tier, which I've called if the mood is right. If you get an opportunity to eat a good homemade macaron, then definitely go for it, but don't buy the industrial ones, it's not worth it. Then And continuing from my least favorite to most favorite, we have the mille-feuille, which is a puff pastry layered with pastry cream. We also have crème brûlée, which translates as burnt cream. It's basically a little dish of custard with a caramelized top. We also have flan, which is a baked custard dessert that has a lot of fans in France. Like I know a lot of people who are super into flan, but I have to say that the following desserts are my favorites. First, we have Paris-Brest, which is 2 slices of choux pastry dough with a delicious almond cream called praliné. If you've never had praliné, it is the best thing in the whole world. It's absolutely delicious. Then we have chocolate mousse. I like it with a little bit of olive oil and a tiny bit of sea salt on top. But then my absolute favorite dessert is tarte aux fraises or strawberry tart. It has been my birthday cake for all my life, so this one is ending in the S tier. Also, when you go to a pastry shop in Paris, you might see some pastries that you've just never seen before, and it's because a lot of the pastry chefs just create new pastries all the time, and you should 100% go with whatever looks good to you and try new things here. Alright, we still have 2 more meals to go, including dinner, which in my opinion has the best foods. And my everyday favorite, which is apéro. So apéro is a little end-of-day drink that is served with a few bites to eat. And you know, if you're coming to Paris, you should absolutely do that at the end of your day because it's a really nice way to relax and spend some time with people you love. So there you could eat what's called a planche or a charcuterie board. I kid you not, this was kind of my main food group in college. It's basically different types of cheeses and cured meats. Then on the side you could also have pâté, which is a thick meat spread. And I'm putting this one in my D tier, which is if the mood is right, but I have to say, the mood is often right for pâté. And apéro will often include a glass of wine. And here you should know that servers at restaurants and bars in Paris are trained to find you a good wine. So just ask for a recommendation. Wine is in my D tier. If the mood is right, it's nice to have a glass of wine. But in any case, even if an apéro is a very cool local experience, you shouldn't eat too much. You should leave room for dinner. And here a few starters can include poireau vinaigrette, which is leeks with vinaigrette, œuf mayo, which is just an egg with mayo. Very, very good. Very French, very Parisian. But I usually want to leave room for the following foods because they are very delicious and not all of them are well known by visitors. So first we have one of my absolute faves, which is duck confit. This is duck that has been cooked in its own fat for a very long time. Super tasty, super tender. The meat is really soft and falls off the bone, and it's often served with potatoes cooked in duck fat, which in itself is delicious. And you'll see a lot of the top dinner foods in France are regional, and this is one of my favorite foods from my region, hands down. So it goes all the way up to the S tier. Then there's saucisse de Toulouse. It's the traditional Toulouse sausage. And here in this video, I ate it with aligot, which is a food that has been gaining a lot of popularity recently, which is mashed potatoes mixed with melted cheese. This is obviously delicious and it belongs in the S tier. Then I also need to tell you about regional foods that are not from my region. And you know, France is a very diverse country regionally. Depending on where you grew up, your eating habits might be pretty different. And you know, there's nothing more different to me than the region of Alsace. It's literally on the other end of the country compared to where I grew up. And the food you need to try from there is called choucroute garnie, which is sauerkraut with a bunch of different meats, sausages, and potatoes. It is a heavy meal, but it is really delicious. And I'll rate it a D because I love it, but I only want to eat it a few times a year. One thing I could have every day though, that I often cook for myself is ratatouille. It's not only the title of my favorite movie about France ever, but it's also a typical food from the region of Provence that I could only describe as very tasty veggies with herbs. Then a very famous French food that everyone wants to try is beef bourguignon. And you know, this one has been in so many movies about France, my favorite being Julie and Julia, which is a movie about Julia Child with Meryl Streep. And this is the one food that I would say deserves its hype. So if you've seen the movie, you know that it's beef that's slowly cooked in red wine with carrots, onions, mushrooms, and lardons, which remember are the little pieces of French bacon that are so delicious. And although I've never made beef bourguignon at home, I love when it's homemade. So hopefully one of my friends who can do it will see this video and invite me to dinner. And the thing I would avoid is if it's served with pasta shells, it's not as good in my opinion. So this is a very iconic French dish for a reason, and I'm gonna give it an S tier. Then we have a few underrated French foods, which I think you should know. The first one being blanquette de veau. So this is slowly cooked veal with carrots, leeks, onions, and herbs. And there's a white sauce and mushrooms. And I also love when it's homemade too. It's very, very good. But I'd say that for me, there's no better comfort food than hachis parmentier. And I sometimes make this one at home. I'll usually make it with duck. Like truly, if you've had a bad day, eating a parmentier de canard will make all your problems go away. So it's gonna be an A for me. So France is the land of cheese. And if you like cheese, you're in the right place because the next 3 dishes are a must try. So first we have raclette, and I know we've stolen this food from Switzerland, but it's a giant wheel of cheese that's melting on top of potatoes. You know, this is what dreams are made of. Then there's fondue, which comes from the Savoie region of France. This is a pot of melted cheese in which you dip a little piece of bread. And then if you're feeling bold, we have tartiflette, which is also a dish from Savoie. It's made with potatoes, reblochon cheese, and lardon. I'm a cheese lover, so all of these are S tier 100%, but only in winter. Please do not eat these this summer. And then, you know, just like for the pastries, we have what I call creative French food. So as you've seen in this video, France has a lot of traditions regarding food, but there's also a lot of new things happening with influences from all around the world and chefs that have a super cool creative vision. So here what I'd recommend is to keep an open mind and sometimes go a bit with the flow because you might be surprised. So here's my final ranking. If you're still there, let me know what's the best thing you ate in Paris and watch one of the videos that are on screen. I'll see you there. Bye for now.